Can I just check, Alan, that I'm sharing my screen and that you can hear me?
Can hear you and I can see your screen. Yeah.
Great.
Okay, over to you, Alan.
Okay, good evening. Um, Welcome to the session on bringing the real world into the EFL classroom. I am very happy to see a wide range of countries represented here. My old stomping ground, Pakistan, even. Wasn't expecting people from that far to be coming to this, but Egypt, Yemen, Abu Dhabi, lots of different countries there. You can say hello in the chat box. And also, if you have any questions, if you can put them into the chat box, Alan will be monitoring that and will interrupt me if I need to answer any burning questions during the presentation. But we hopefully will have time at the end of the presentation to answer questions. In this presentation, or after this presentation, you're going to have a choice to take the red pill or the blue pill. If you don't know what this is about, you obviously haven't seen the movie The Matrix. The Matrix is all about perceptions of reality, what is real, what is unreal. But the red pill and the blue pill is about a choice between the uncomfortable truth or your current reality. I'm going to bring that back to you at the end of this presentation. Main question here is, Alan, could you control the mute buttons and make sure that everybody's muted except me? We're getting a bit of background noise.
Yeah, that must be a late incomer. You'll have to unmute yourself again.
Thanks. I'll do that. The first question we have to ask is, what is the real world? There's a quote from a movie that came out about, oh, it's about 15 years ago now. Sean Connery was playing a man called Paul Armstrong, who was a university professor, a legal professor. And he said, why is everything the bleeping real world except education? And I tend to agree with them. Everything outside the classroom is called the real world. Inside the classroom, it's not the real world. It's somehow false. It's engineered. It's different from the real world. But why and how? Well, when we're asking the question about what the real world is, we're talking about things, we're talking about texts, we're talking about images, opinions, attitudes, and perspectives. All of these come together to create the real world. Here is an image of the world. It's not a standard image of the world. It's been, you might think it looks a bit stretched, but this is a representation of the world that shows the actual size of countries compared to each other. So on a regular map of the world, Europe and America is much, much bigger, and Africa is much, much smaller. But this shows you that the countries like the UK are much smaller than a lot of the countries in Africa. And there are different ways that we can represent the world. There's a website that creates interesting images of the world based on different factors. The one we just looked at was about the physical size of each country. But these maps are made to represent the amount that different countries have reduced CO2 by between 1980 and the year 2000. There's also a map here that represents the HIV cases for people between the ages of 15 and 49 around the world. There's a number of journeys per year that people in each country make in one of these maps. And another is about the number of international immigrants living in these countries. Now, which map do you think matches which topic? I'll give you a minute to think about that. So that first map is about the number of international immigrants living there. It might not be a surprise that America, the United States, is the largest country on that map. And that's in South America has very, very few immigrants. Similarly, Africa, the northwest of Africa, has a lot more immigrants than the south of Africa. The Middle East has quite a sizable number of immigrants living there. Look at the size of the countries represented there. The number of train journeys per year, you can see that India dominates there. A huge number of train journeys because of the rail system there. Russia and China are quite large as well, but hardly any in South America. There aren't any big national rail systems down there. HIV, sadly, is endemic in most of Africa. I didn't realize how big an issue it was in India as well, but reducing in a lot of the Northern Hemisphere. And then CO2 emissions, the reduction in CO2 emissions has largely happened in Europe. Africa and the Americas don't count there. Notice that the United States is extremely small there. So our perception of the world is based on different issues, can change quite dramatically, depending on how we're looking at it, what lens we're using to look at the world. From an English language teaching perspective, we often use materials that are very, very carefully edited. There's a selection of content, a very careful selection of content. It's highly sanitized. It's very clean and like the shiny, happy people in the Chinese propaganda poster on the right there. It's also aspirational. The assumption is that all of the learners are going to go on and get great jobs and live in great places and travel and be international global citizens. And that can lead to representation of unreal situations. And often a presentation in textbooks of what is easy to learn or teach versus the actual language use that we would find in the context that we see in our published materials. There's also a phenomenon, an acronym called parsnips. And publishers work very hard to make sure that there are no parsnips in our textbooks. And what does that mean? And does anybody know what this acronym means? If you know what any of these letters stand for, you can put it in the chat box now. Editors are often trying to exclude politics from their textbooks. They also have no mention of alcohol. They avoid talking about religion and sex and narcotics. They also don't like having isms, communism, feminism, etc. in their textbook. If you can all mute your microphones, please. We're getting a little bit of feedback in the background there, so please keep your mics on mute. Where were we? Isms. And the last one, especially for the Middle East, the mention of pork or pigs is not allowed in textbooks. This acronym parsnips is quite controversial because a lot of these things are a large part of what happens in the real world. And if we miss out on all of these, then how do students form the language to be able to talk about or deal with situations that involve these things? So the publisher's view or the public textbook view of the world is very much like the top half of this picture. That's shiny, happy people in a clean country, clean, safe place, doing easy things. But actually, the reality is more like the bottom picture. Lots of obstacles and difficult things to negotiate. And real life situations are a lot more messy than the ones we find in our classroom. And if we take a real world view of the English language classroom, we can make better decisions based on evidence, knowledge of risks and benefits of bringing the real world into the classroom. We can help our students to be more effective, and we can, as teachers, be more effective by thinking critically and solving real world problems. And we can help our students to become more resilient to challenges and setbacks and to help deal with them. As teachers, it helps us to be more compassionate with our learners and be better able to understand the challenges that a range of different people in different contexts face, and help our students to understand those challenges also. So, what does a real world view of English language teaching look like? Well, we'll start with authentic texts, using texts that have been made for, have not been specially written for learners. Most of the texts that are in textbooks have been engineered, simplified, modified to be easier to understand for the learners. And yes, that's because the material needs to be at the right level of comprehension for our learners. But when they are too engineered, when they are too false, they don't really represent reality. Reality is where this arrow is pointing, in the middle of that circle. We're surrounded by beliefs, by values, and by what's being done around us in the world. And our perception of reality is filtered through all of those. To be able to use authentic text in the classroom, we should be looking at news articles, blogs, websites. Literature also counts as authentic text. It's written for a non-L2 user, unless it's graded readers or things like that. Those are written specifically for the L2 learners. But we should also be looking at audio resources like radio, podcasts, real-life recordings, music. Songs are just as relevant as the others. Television, cinema, social media videos are also very useful sources. So you can find all of these texts these days very, very quickly and easily using the internet, but you may have to search for a while to find a piece of material that is entirely appropriate to your audience, to the age level that you're dealing with, and to the purpose that you want to use the texts for. Another part of the real world is looking at the situations that we're using language in. The tasks that we're giving our students to do. For example, the bottom right-hand picture here. This is a presentation on global warming. It's been created by an Indian student who was given the task of explaining what global warming was. Role plays, projects, and simulations. You see the medical students in the top are working with a simulated body and a simulated medical situation. So these kinds of things happen in different parts, different subjects in education, not only English language teaching. We can use role plays, projects, and simulations in English language teaching, and we'll look at those later in the presentation. Field trips are also a useful thing to do. We've got some kids there out in the forest and nature, and taking your students out of the classroom, taking them into the real world, showing them what happens in hotels, restaurants, markets, or going to museums and exhibitions so that they can experience what it's like to be in an English-speaking environment are all good ideas. You don't have to leave the classroom to do these kinds of things. You can do virtual field trips. There are a lot of museums around the world these days that have virtual tours of their exhibitions and art galleries also. And I'd highly recommend you research some of those. It means that you have world-class institutions that you can use their displays and resources. They also often have learning plans and lesson plans to go with those. So well worth researching if you can. And the final aspect of authenticity is the language that we use. Now, language conveys content, the content that we speak about, the topics that we speak about. And those topics in textbooks can be sometimes very contrived. If we think about what actual content we use in real life, we can tailor our learning more closely to what happens. Having language content that has mistakes in it, that has restatements, that has incomplete utterances, that backtracks, that is more real than a perfectly clean, polished recording that has none of these things in it. Misunderstandings is something that doesn't often appear in textbooks, but they happen all the time. We had one at the beginning of this recording. Alan wasn't sure what the person who asked the question was asking about. There's a negotiation there, a mediation that needs to happen to be able to get the message. And that kind of negotiation of misunderstanding is one of the most useful things that learners can learn to do. Idioms you see in the picture here, keep it real. There are a lot of idioms that are used in the real world that don't get into textbooks. They're very often used in memes on the internet as well. So cultural references, I've already made a few today. The Matrix, Just Cause. We're going to be seeing quite a few cultural references coming up in this presentation, but cultural references are very important. Most people in this country, if I say red pill, blue pill, they will understand what I mean. But that's not the case in all countries. We need to understand what the cultural references are in the country and the culture to be able to understand the conversations that people are having. I've lived in Thailand, Japan, India, and Pakistan, and the most useful thing I ever did in those countries was watch TV and find out who the local celebrities were and understand what people were talking about as part of their regular conversations, because it was those cultural references that helped me to understand what they were talking about. Taboo language is another area that is completely omitted from textbooks. Now, you might not want to teach your students to swear, but I don't think it's about teaching students to swear. I do think it's about helping them to understand when someone is using taboo language, how they're using it, and what to ignore so that you can understand the underlying message behind it. Movies, films are a very good source of taboo language if you're interested in going down that route. But I'm going to tell you a few stories just to illustrate the problems of inauthentic language teaching and inauthentic language use. This is L'Assange sur la table. Eddie Izzard is a British comedian who does a whole comedy routine about the farce of teaching French in high schools, when we're being taught strange phrases like this: the monkey is on the table. In what way, shape, or form is that a useful or interesting thing? Well, it's interesting, but it's not useful. It doesn't have a practical use. The monkey's on the table, the elephant is under the table, the banana is on the chair. these things are just nonsense sentences. They're almost surreal. And language teachers use those a lot. Sometimes we use them to get students to make it memorable, to make it surprising and interesting. But we also need to try and make it practical. One attempt at doing that was made in a textbook that was called Departures. I apologize, I can't remember the name of the publisher. But it's a very old textbook now. I don't think it's in print. It was one of the first textbooks I used, and there was a lesson in it about going through customs. The lesson was used to teach much and many. So, how much water have you got? How many oranges do you have? As far as I am aware, when you go through customs, the customs officers don't ask you those questions. So that's a realistic situation, but the actual language lesson didn't match the situation. It was contrived, it was invented just for the purpose of teaching much and many. And that's always, I think, a bad reason for choosing a situation. There needs to be a real use for that language in a real situation. I was moderating a TOEFL test once, and this question came up. The conversation went something like this. I'm bored. Oh, well, why don't you read a book? I don't have anything to read. Well, how about some 19th century Russian literature? You might like Dostoevsky. And I burst out laughing in the middle of this TOEFL test. I shouldn't have done because the students were writing their answers, but it was a ridiculous conversation. Nobody has ever had that conversation anywhere in the world. Why they're using it as a test item on a TOEFL test, I don't know. So the unrealistic conversations. And the last one, Oxford University Press produced a pronunciation book called 3 or 3. And in their wisdom, they decided to launch this book in Northern Ireland. So the Northern Irish editor of manager of Oxford University Press stood up on a stage in front of 300 people at the launch of their brilliant new pronunciation book and said, here's our new book, 3 or 3, because in Northern Ireland, they don't pronounce TH as they pronounce it as. So 3 or 3, there was no difference. Some of the things that we teach our students are not real. Some of them are invented. Some of them are invented is one. An example of that is don't start a sentence with a conjunction. If you look at newspaper articles, there are lots and lots and lots of sentences that start with the word but, or and, or so. There are also quite a few that start with because. So we often teach our students things that are not true. What we need to do is look at real life examples, real situations, real accents, the way that people speak in real life, and use those as our models. I don't know if you recognize my accent or not. I'm Scottish. I've got a mild Scottish accent, but I don't particularly want my students to mimic my accent. I just need them to be understandable and be able to pronounce clearly enough to be understood by people of other nationalities. The whole idea of training somebody to copy is also another quite ridiculous idea, I think. And that is the problem with the way that we construct English language teaching materials, that there are a lot of things that once you examine them, once you think about them in a little bit more depth, do seem a little bit ridiculous. But there are problems with a real world view. We said if you're using real text, authentic texts, then making those texts accessible to learners can be difficult. what's the relevance of them? Are they current materials or not? And how can we get our students to understand them and use them to best effect? That usually depends on the tasks, the kind of learning tasks that we're giving our learners to use to access the material. But the tasks may also be complex as well. Real world tasks tend to be complex. We might need to adapt them or have some kind of compensatory mechanism in there to help make the tasks easier for our students to complete. We can streamline the tasks and try and edit out the complexity, but not too much. You still need to leave some of that complexity in there because that's the reason we're using them, so that the students have something to work with and move forward with. Time constraints are a huge issue. I don't know a teacher in the world that doesn't say there isn't enough time. Balancing all the different demands within the curriculum, using real world issues can take a lot of time to help the students to understand what they are. Having clearly structured language instruction to help them to do that adds to the demands on the teacher. And we need to be very careful that we're not burning ourselves out. We also have to think about cultural sensitivity and appropriateness. Some content is not going to be suitable for certain age groups and for people in certain countries. And we also have the problems of how do we assess the real world tasks and activities. Ideally, it would be by using authentic assessment. Now, I'm not going to go into what authentic assessment is, but authentic assessment is basically the way that those tasks would be assessed in real life. If you're doing a presentation, for example, then people are not going to sit there and score you on different criteria, but the audience may well clap or ask questions at the end. And often the more questions you get at the end, the more interesting the presentation will be. But we also have to be careful of hidden dangers. Those are multiple on the internet. I don't know if you know who this guy is. This is a guy called Andrew Tate, who runs a website that just happens to be called The Real World. But he is now under house arrest in Romania for people trafficking offences and has a number of different allegations against him. Those kinds of things in the UK now, this guy has been accused of influencing young male students considerably, and people are quite worried about the influence of negative aspects on the internet on our young learners. So while we do need to be aware of what the dangers are, it would also be a good idea to teach our students how to recognize them and how to deal with those dangers. Protecting them is maybe not the best way of doing it, although with younger children, certainly, I think it would be a very good idea to make sure that you have all the filtering systems in place that you can to help them to not come across some of this content. With older learners, we need to teach them how to deal with that content, what to pay attention to, how to deal with biases and influential materials. So, when you are thinking of adopting a real world view, one of the key things to do is to observe the world around you. What does it look like? What happens in it? What kinds of things are going on? And what are the different views that are being expressed inside and outside of your own culture? Think about including diverse voices in your lessons. And by voices, I mean accents as well as different content perspectives. Don't be afraid to try new things. step outside of your comfort zone. If you're feeling comfortable when you're doing it for the first time, you're probably not doing it. If you're trying to introduce ideas from the real world into your classroom, it is going to be slightly uncomfortable in different ways. And it might be a good idea to recognize that before you do it. You need to be aware of your own biases. What we're not talking about here is making everybody think the same way that you do. It's about acknowledging that there are a range of opinions out there, and we need to equip our students with the ability to explore them, look at them, choose for themselves, and tell other people what their views are and why. So you need to question your own beliefs and don't just accept everything that you hear or read without looking at alternative sources. Oh, that includes me, by the way. Don't believe me until you go off and read a number of other sources and verify that I am telling you the truth. You need to be willing to learn from your mistakes, and it is all about trying things out, making mistakes, improving on those mistakes, and having a constant improvement feedback loop. We'll be looking at that a little bit later. So how can we do these things in practice? Adapting and modifying authentic materials is a good idea. Again, not too much. If you are using materials that come from a newspaper, for example, it may be that the article is way too long. It could be that you only need the first 2 paragraphs. You don't need the full 10 paragraphs, for example. There may be vocabulary in it that is too complex for the learners, and you might want to simplify it. There might be sentence structures in there that are too complex that could be simplified. But again, don't adapt too much, or then when you rewrite things, you could be destroying all the real worldness of the original material. Gradually integrating real world tasks based on learner proficiency levels is a good idea. I wouldn't take a newspaper article into a primary classroom unless I had a proper purpose for it, and unless the tasks were going to be manageable for those kids. It needs to, the kind of tasks and the kind of text that you're using need to be relevant and useful and usable by the learners that you're working with. Time, again, managing the time to enable the new content and tasks. If you're going to start introducing some new activities, then something else is going to have to be shorter or edited out, and you need to take that into account. So planning the curriculum to accommodate real world activities is a good idea. Now, if you want examples of that, the British Council has a project called Connecting Classrooms, which has a lot of very interesting ways in which you can incorporate global citizenship ideas into the classroom. Oxfam, the charity, also has a curriculum for global citizenship. And the United Nations, UNESCO, has a whole series of learning resources connected to the strategic development goals of the United Nations, which covers the range of topics on the graphic there, if you are interested in looking at those.
Alan,
integrating global. Yes.
Would this be a good moment to pause for a couple of comments and a question?
I can, if I just get this last line in.
Yes,
integrating global issues into existing topics is really important. And I would, we are going to have a completely separate presentation on that. So Linda's going to do the next presentation on integrating global issues into the classroom. Alan, you had were there questions?
Yeah, we've got one big question which I don't expect to be able to deal with off the cuff, but it might be something you want to come back to, and that is Question from Jamal Jafar. How can we integrate AI in real world teaching?
Now, that is something that I wanted to, I considered integrating into this presentation and I didn't, but there's the question with AI is, well, ChatGPT, for example, are they authentic texts or not? Now, I would say that they are, because they're not specifically written for second language learners. They are authentic texts, but the texts that are produced by AI have a certain formula to them. You'll find if you put in the same, I actually did it for this presentation. I put in tips on role plays in English language classes, and it came up with a set of tips. And then I put, okay, tips for simulations in English language classes, and it came up with exactly the same set of tips. And I put in tips for what was the other one? Project-based learning, and it was exactly the same set of tips. It's just been moved around a bit. So I think you have to be careful with AI, but getting students to generate AI texts and then have a look at them, looking at them, analysing them, looking at the model that they have produced, and then getting the students to produce their own versions of those texts, I have absolutely no problem with. I think you can use it for generating lists of sentences about certain topics, or if you're doing a grammar practice, you could get the AI to generate your example sentences for you, for example. You could get the students to do that, to research themselves. Can they get the AI to make a story using certain words, and these students can check whether the AI has done it successfully. So I think there are lots of different ways of doing that.
And there's some quite a longish comment from someone called Mohammed Mustafa, which leads to a question. Classrooms remain unreal realms, and we're merely trying to drive our learners to think for themselves. Taboos you mentioned and restrictions will hinder learners from being exposed to the real world, whatever real actually means. And then comes the question, I guess what you're trying to say is to be more creative in integrating reality in our classrooms. Is that right?
You've got it. That's right.
Sorry.
Carry on.
No, go on.
No, I'll wait till you finish your list. That's fine.
Just a couple of nice comments. One from somebody who teaches aviation English, pointing out that they do say tree rather than three for reasons of clarity. And just a lot of very positive comments. One person actually saying that they were very pleased to be going down the rabbit hole with you.
Yes, indeed. Oh, yes, and it's a long and deep rabbit hole.
And I'm afraid quite a few people having problems with audibility. Your sound is a bit muddy. I don't know if there's anything you can adjust at your end. I mean, I can follow it, but it is a bit murky.
Does it help if I keep the microphone here?
Oh, that's better.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'll keep the microphone close to my mouth.
Thank you.
I noticed. I just had a quick look, and there was a mention of National Geographic. The Cengage is the publisher. They use the National Geographic materials in their textbooks, and as far as I'm aware, they are the only publisher that uses authentic materials to produce their learning materials for second language. And they are very, very interesting series of articles. There's a series of learning materials. I would recommend you have a look at those. There are also a number of websites out there that will take newspaper articles and news videos and produce and have lesson plans produced for them for second language learners to help understand, to help learners to get used to watching and reading the news in English. We are going to, for each of these webinars, we're going to create a resource list. Now, that won't be available until next week for this one, but there will be a list of resources that you can go to and explore more, find out a little bit more about how to go about doing all the things in the webinars. So, we're going to go on to have a look at the specific kinds of learning tasks that you can do. You can get your students to take part in to help to integrate real world tasks and real world content. They are listed on here, so problem solving, role play projects and simulations. And we are going to have a specific webinar on project-based learning in November. I'll be taking that one also. So the examples that we have here will come back to in a lot more depth in November. This is just to give you an overview and an idea of what to take into consideration if you're planning to integrate these into your teaching. Taking problem solving to begin with, there are a number of different types of problems that you can solve, or ways that you can solve problems. You can sort things into different groups. You can sequence them in different patterns, in different ways, in different orders. You can rank them in terms of importance, of usefulness, of practicality, etc. You can evaluate them, say which ones are better than which ones are not so good, and why. You can explore the causes and effects of problems in the with the view to looking at how you can create solutions to those problems. And you can consider different viewpoints. For some people, they might be problems, and for other people, they might not be problems. Different people can have different views on different problems, and we'll look at those in a moment. And also, if you are going to then try and take a course of action to solve that problem, then you need to plan what that action is. You need to decide how you're going to go about doing that. So here's an example of organization. You've got a list of foods, or you get the students to generate a list of foods, and then they have to decide where they go on the organizational diagram. Standard biology lesson, actually. So if you're integrating content and language learning, then these kinds of ways of doing things are very useful. You might also then get them to rank those foods for a calorie value, which foods have a higher calorie value, which foods have a lower calorie value. And they might be surprised that it's not all the fatty foods that have the higher calorie values, it's often the proteins that have a higher calorie value. And that's part of the investigation, the exploration, the discovery of real world facts. You might get them to rank different things in different ways, order them from 1 to 5, or to describe what their top 10 ideas are, or have a different kind of task, like you're going to on a field trip to the desert, for example, but you can only take 5 things. What should you take and why? What are the most important things to take if you're going on an overnight trip camping in the desert? The last one is a more fun activity. If you imagine 3 different famous people and you compare and contrast which ones should you get rid of if you're going to save the others. I did this with a Chinese group, and I asked them to give me 3 famous Chinese people, and they gave me Chairman Mao, a famous Chinese sports person and a famous movie star. And then I said, okay, and I got a bit nervous about this. I said, well, who would you throw overboard? And he immediately said, Chairman Mao. Oh, why? Well, he can swim very well. Apparently, they thought he's got a reputation for being a very strong swimmer. I said, but there are sharks in the water. How would he deal with the sharks? So, oh, he's so strong, he would punch them on the nose. So when I thought that we were going to get into a difficult cultural conversation, actually the answer for them was very, very easy. And that's why it's important to get students to explain their thinking. Here's another activity that is very useful. The PMI is called the plus, minus, and interesting. You can have any problem or any situation. It could be a rule, it could be a change, it could be a decision that you need to make in your life, it could be a potential law. But thinking about what are the pluses of this, only the pluses. You don't think about all of them at the same time, you only think about the pluses. Then you think only about the minuses. And during that conversation, if any questions come up, put them in the interesting column. You try and generate as many different ideas as possible, as many different ideas as possible. There is no one answer to these. There have to be a lot of different points. And the whole point is to think of multiple replies to these points. And you only deal, obviously, with one topic at one time. You don't deal with them all. So, but looking at you can also call them advantages, disadvantages, questions, but plus, minus, interesting is a really useful task for any content area. When you're examining a problem, looking at stating the problem, defining the problem concretely in the middle, before you start looking at what are the causes of the problem, what effects does the problem have, and what are the possible solutions. And of course, those possible solutions could mitigate each of the causes. There should be a matching solution for each of the causes of the problem. And there might be multiple causes, there could be multiple solutions. It depends on the nature of the problem. But having it organized in a graphic form like this can help students to see how they can organize that and then translate that into cause effect essay or problem solution essay after they've generated all the ideas. Once they've generated all the ideas, that's the hard work done. Linking them together is the task of, in writing an essay, is a way of sorry, let me state that again. Generating all the ideas is the hard work. And once they then have to link them together, that's a much easier task. And they've basically written all of the essay for themselves. They're just filling in the gaps with the linking language and the language that makes it more coherent after they've done an exercise like this. When you're doing problem-solving tasks, making sure that you have a topic that is interesting to the learners. You don't need any complex materials. You can use existing content. It might be content in a textbook or content from the newspaper. It could just be a prompt that you have, a single question that you want to ask them. You can tweak existing tasks and change the task, frame the task as simple questions. One of the most important things is that you give lots of positive feedback and have learners justify their answers. The next set of activities, we've done problem solving. Now we're going to look at role plays, and there are a bunch of standard examples of role plays there that you get in a lot of textbooks. I think role plays is probably the one that most people are most familiar with. Sorry, can you mute your, is that Mirella? I think you've got your microphone on. If you can turn that off, that'd be great. Thanks, Mirella. So we're fairly familiar with these kinds of things. Getting students to take the positions of the receptionist and the guest, the interviewer, the interviewee, and making sure that they swap roles is important as well. You can make role plays more interesting also by taking more real life situations. I'm not going to talk through these, you can read them for yourself. I apologize, there's a typo at the very beginning there. That should be your child is behaving strangely. Making these into little cards and giving a card to giving a card each to the students, and then they match up. They could talk together as parents. So what am I going to say? How am I going to start this conversation? And the children could talk together. Well, how are we going to explain this? They can build up the language for what they're going to use, and then get them into pairs of parents and one parent, one child talking to each other to work out how they're going to deal with this problem. The good thing about these kinds of activities is you could do that exercise again and again and again by mixing up the parents and the children, different parent with a different child, or flipping the roles, and the conversation is going to be completely different every single time. So they can practice the same kind of language again and again and again with different partners, but they will never get bored because it will be a different conversation each time. When you're using role plays, it's most important to make sure that the kind of topics that you're doing are relevant to students' interests, that you're moving from simple role plays to more complex ones, that you're increasing the difficulty level as you go along. That there are clear instructions, clear guidance as to what to do. I hope you thought those role cards were clear. And get the students to feel comfortable taking risks. They often use role plays because the role is a mask that they can hide behind. Using masks is not a bad idea either, and getting a mask that they can hold in front of their face can help them to increase their confidence level because it's not them that's talking, it's the mask. But that role, they can hide behind that role, and they can use that as a way of boosting their confidence, and they will be more likely to take risks and won't feel so bad when they make mistakes. It does encourage students to be more creative, more imaginative. The most important thing, of course, is that you give concrete feedback on their performance. It's not, okay, that's great, next task. You have to have some form of feedback on what they're in their performance and how they can do that better. And repeating it with different partners is always a good idea. Projects. We're back at the picture that we had before of the Indian students project on explaining global warming. I'll include a link to this one in the resource list, actually, because I was very impressed by this. This is a self-playing video. It's about, it says they're 2 minutes, 15 seconds long. It goes through the evidence for global warming, the causes of it, the effects, and goes into a lot of detail on an autoplay PowerPoint that is very well put together and technically very well done. The student who did this was in secondary school, so it's not beyond the realms of many of your students. Getting students to produce a good project, you will need to give them a good project brief, a description of what you want them to do, a very clear description of what you want them to do. It should also have a series of success criteria. A good project will include X, Y, Z. It will, what are the quality standards that you're expecting? How long is it going to be? What kinds of things do you want to see in it? And there should be a clear methodology for them to follow. An inquiry process. I'm sorry, sir. Could you mute your microphone, please? Could you mute your microphone, please? Somebody's just entered. I'll keep going and hope that. Yeah, sorry. Alan, can you mute everybody again, please? Thank you. We have to find out a way of working around that. That's all right. So there has to be a clear, you need to know what the inquiry process is. How are your students going to look into this topic? What are they going to do? What kind of resources are they going to look at? How do they go about completing the tasks for the project? And then making sure there are plenty of opportunities along the road all the way through the project process for reflection and feedback. The final point here is that there should be some form of public presentation. I was quite impressed that this Indian student put their presentation publicly on YouTube and was getting an awful lot of very positive responses from other students around the world. So you should consider doing similar kinds of things with your students. Here's an example of a project. Again, I'm not going to read through this. This project was designed for students in the hotel and tourism industry. So where you might think that this is quite a difficult one, it's for
Sorry, you'll have to unmute, Alan.
Thanks, sorry. For these students, it was an appropriate topic of appropriate difficulty for the level of education they were in. Okay, he's managed to mute himself this time. Great. The important part here is that
everybody, I've muted everybody. Please keep your microphones off.
You do it again, Alan. Thanks. It's a bit like tennis, this, isn't it? So the task that they had was designing a publicity pamphlet explaining their festival to the world and present the pamphlet to the management team, which was the rest of the class, and they'll choose the most likely to attract a global audience. Now, basically, this is a large extended role play.
Oh, dear.
Could you perhaps message him directly, Alan?
Yeah.
So the yeah, it's basically a large extended role play, and go from role play simulations is going to be the next one we're talking about. The difference is really a role play is a small, short task in the class. A project is longer. It could be a project that takes a lesson. It could be a project that takes a couple of weeks. It could be much longer than that. The longer the process, then the more likely it is that you'll need to start thinking more about it becoming a simulation. Incidentally, the pictures that I'm showing you on the Planning a Festival slides are pictures of Norwich, which is where Alan and I live. The first one is the Festival of Lights, which attracts about 5,000 to 10,000 people when it was run over the last 2-3 years. And this is Norwich Pride, which attracts about 15,000 to 20,000 people. So large scale festivals that can be written in pamphlet form. When you're designing projects, teachers need to set expectations. What is it that you want to see? What are the normal things that you would like to have a look at. And it's very good, it's very useful to have models of what you want the students to produce so that they know what kind of thing you want them, the kind of standards that you're expecting them to produce. You need to be able to see where the gaps are in their knowledge. What is it that they need to, what gaps need to be filled, and how can you go about doing that? Because your job in a project-based situation is to structure the learning so that they fill those gaps and are able to produce the product at the end. Making sure that there are roles there that affect real careers. So there's a manager, there's a secretary, there might be a reporter. Those kinds of things are very useful, and that will be specific to the task, the project that you're getting them to do. Making sure that you monitor the learning very closely and give constructive feedback constantly is very important. For some projects, for example, the City Festival one, you might want to get the students to talk to people on the City Council. Thank you. Having your students talk to people on the City Council or about... Oh, Nisreen, can you please mute your microphone? Nisreen? We will get through this presentation. Talking directly to people on the City Council, talking to people who are in the hospitality industry is a good idea. No matter what level your students are, bringing in people who do these kinds of things on a regular basis so that they can give them tips on how to make a good product in the end is very helpful. Now, simulations are much longer and much more complex. I'm going to give you an example of what a simulation is. They're multi-stage projects. They go on for much longer timelines. So the simulations that I've used often go on for between 5 and 10 lessons. So it can take a whole term to complete a project. In fact, one that I did took a full year. There are clear roles for each of the members of a team that are doing the simulation. There are clear goals. There is language support all the way through the process. So you know what the process that the students are going to go through is, and you provide the language support they need at the point that they need it. Here's an example of what I call the product development simulation. I'll get him to read through that. So the students have a very simple instruction. It's not complex at all. They can do anything with that. The first thing they need to do is brainstorm ideas for what kinds of things they might. That's a whole classroom session in and of itself. The idea generation, deciding on the idea might take a couple of lessons. Doing some market research, going out and asking people what kinds of things they would like, defining what their audience is, deciding who they're going to create a product for and what that product's going to be, then deciding what it looks and feels like. That's another classroom session. So you see, we're building up. We've got 1, 2, 3 classroom sessions already. It's building over a long period of time. If they were in a company doing this, then there would be a team leader. There'd be somebody who makes the agenda for each meeting. They have to decide what their action plan is going to be at the end of the meeting, and then they go off and do it and come back and take information back into the meeting. Now, that is very much a simulation of what happens in an actual workplace. And you could create other forms of simulation that do similar kinds of things. Success factors with simulation is this effective feedback cycle, having a constant feedback and improvement during the meetings, after each meeting, during each meeting. When there's a problem, they get some feedback on it and they try and improve and do it better the next time. In between these project meetings, there would be language input sessions at different points. So when they're generating ideas, you might have a lesson on the language of how to have a conversation where you suggest your ideas, making suggestions. Could be the functional language they use. Agreeing and disagreeing might be the language that they need to focus on before they have the meeting. Then before they have the marketing meeting where they're asking questions of the general public, then you'd have a lesson on question formation, for example. So the language they need comes in before they actually need to do the tasks as part of the simulation, but it's the same project going all the way through the course. You can use simulations to structure whole courses. Learner choice is built into it. You're not telling them what to do. You're giving them a specific instruction, and within that instruction, they can choose from a large number of options. The instructions need to be clear. Staging needs to be clear. You need to know exactly what's going to happen, and the tasks need to be realistic within the time frame that you're giving them. Language support at every stage is very important. And that really is all that I was going to talk about, other than to say, you now have the choice. What are you going to take? The red pill or the blue pill? Any questions?
One person saying the red pill always.
You're very brave. Abid's quite happy he's staying where he is.
That's
Half of each. I don't think you can mix and match. Oh, Asma, you'll have to look back at the beginning of the presentation. Red is accepting the uncomfortable reality, and blue is staying where you are. But does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask? I think we've got 15 minutes left.
Yep.
Okay, may I start?
Please do.
It's okay. How to increase the interaction between me and the students, and how I can apply it with the time management in the classroom while I'm teaching, or if I teach English courses outside the curriculum.
Okay, you've asked how you can increase the interaction between you and the students. And
Yes.
I think in my reality, that's the wrong question. I would be asking how you can increase the interaction between the students. And the way you can do that is by using more pair and group work, by giving them tasks that they complete by talking to each other. And you can listen to them performing and give them feedback on what they do. Or they can give feedback to each other on what they do. if you really want to increase interaction between you and the students, the best way to do that is to ask them questions and to get them to ask you questions. Very often, the teacher is the one that asks all the questions. Give them a chance to ask questions, and you might find that your class becomes much more interactive.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Abid, you've got your hand up. Abid Ahmed Khan?
Yes. Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Uh,
A little chilly.
Thank you. Wow. How to if a student do not have so much information related the topic which we assign, so how can we conclude it? Or
Could you
should
ask
we
that question
switch?
again? Could you ask
My
that question
question is
again,
that, yes, sure. If the students do not have sufficient information related to topic while teaching English language, so how to conclude that topic, how to conclude the lecture, or should we switch to the another topic?
Switching between topics too quickly confuses the students.
Yeah,
if they don't
yeah.
have enough information, they need to find information themselves, or you need to provide a selection of information for them. So they can either go and search for the information they want on the internet and bring it back to the classroom. That's often a very useful thing to do. Then they can share the information they have about the topic. Or you can present them with some information that you've already found that they can look at and use to investigate the topic. But certainly, I would certainly not jump away from a topic just because the students don't know anything about it. The whole purpose of learning is to find out new information about new topics. And so helping them to understand the content of the topic is the most important part. You can also, if you don't have the time to access the internet or find new materials, you could get them to do some problem-solving tasks. For example, if it was if the topic is about, I don't know, nuclear power, get the students to think into different groups. One group is local farmers, one group is the environmental lobbyists, one group is the politicians in the town, another group is the general public. And they have to think about that problem. A nuclear power plant is going to be built near your town. What do each of these groups of people think about it? So the farmers think about it from the farmer's view, the townspeople think about it from the town person's perspective, etc. And then the different groups share their information, and you can have a kind of debate about whether the town actually wants this to happen or not. So you can change it from learning content, learning the stuff that they're being given, to getting them to think through an idea or think through a problem, or what could the possible consequences be. Rana,
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Rana, you had a question?
Hello, hi. First of all, thank you so much for such an enriching session like this one.
No, thank you.
May I have a couple of questions, or I don't have time for that?
Sure.
I'm gonna go.
No, that's fine. Absolutely fine.
All right. I'm going to go with the most important one for me. So basically, your techniques do depend on communicative English, if I may call it so, right? Mm-hmm. When I do so, especially for grade 9, that is pre-IGCSE, do I focus in my success criteria on correct grammar, or just on delivering the message, or on their attempt in finishing that project? What do you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's my answer.
So I should focus on
success.
Every...
Yeah. Any good marking criteria would focus on all of those. You have you can't only focus on one of them. If you're only marking for grammar, but the content is rubbish, sorry. If you're only marking for grammar, but the content is rubbish, then that's not a very good marking system. So they have to have marks for the content. There should be marks for the accuracy. You're talking IGCSE, so these kids are going to be quite proficient, are they? They're B2.
You might surprise when I tell you that in my country, I don't usually receive proficient, a high proficiency when it comes to grade 9. But so what the amount of let's say the marks that should go to grammar, 25% in a project-based learning, 25, would that be sufficient? How much?
If it's project-based learning, well, it depends. I mean, the weight that you give it will affect the grades, and it will affect the amount of attention that the students to it. I'm not going to give you a number to put on that, but I don't think 20% is unreasonable. It depends how many other criteria you have. So if you're giving, I don't know, 30% to content, and there might be another 20% to the process that they go through. Some people like to have the students think about how they completed the task and whether they could do that better in the future. So you've got product plus process, and then the quality of the product. Yes, the quality of the language, the quality of the content. It could be performance of if it's a presentation. There could be something on that. So all of those things need to be taken into account. Absolutely.
All right, thank you. One last question, if I may.
Okay, but there are 3 more behind you, so
okay, let's give others a chance. But thank you so much.
Come back. Let's come back if we've got time, Rana. That's
all
great.
Right, all right.
I think Mohammed, you're next on the list. I think Mohammed Mustafa.
Yes. Hi. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes, I can.
Hi. Thank you, Alan. This has been like super exciting presentation. Thank you very much.
Oh, good.
Thank you. The fact is that I've tried some of these activities that you've mentioned in different ways, of course, but I guess my question is all about the predicament I face when I try to assess my students using some kind of authentic activities like the ones you mentioned, especially in business English students, when I ask them to, as you said, create some kind of a product line. So would there be some kind of a systematic scientific process that I could follow to design first the activity, then the way of assessing my learners? And that's
yes. Yeah, I'll give you an academic reference for this. It's Wiggins and McTee.
Okay.
And the method is called backward design.
Okay, brilliant. That's the one I'm looking for.
Backward curriculum design. So it's starting from the learning outcomes, and then you start with the learning outcomes, then you design the assessment, how you're going to assess those learning outcomes. And there are specific methods to do that. It's a very limited range of methods for doing that.
Okay.
And then you plan the learning process, and then you plan the materials. So it's called backward design because often we jump to the materials first and decide what are we going to do with this. But starting from the learning outcome and planning it backwards that way gives you a very, very scientific, very concrete way of going about designing your lessons and your assessments. The assessments themselves would be performance-based. So as similar to the conversation that I was just having with Rana, it will depend on the kinds of things that you want to measure. Each task will be different.
Thank you very much, Alan.
Okay, and Mohammed Naga.
Yes, please.
Hi.
Hi, Mr. Alan. Really, I'd like to thank you for this great presentation. A great wow for you.
Thank you.
Also, I'd like to share my point of view regarding the whole presentation. I think that the word adaptation is the secret here in this presentation, as I think that we could not apply all what you said really in our real life situations in the class. We cannot expose, especially in the Middle East area. I think we are not allowed, and we cannot expose our children and students to real life situations, watching movies without restrictions, for instance. So
well,
I
that
think
depends on the movie.
movies or anything that you mentioned in real
Yeah.
life, that we
Yeah.
should bring real life to the class, or also we can ask the class to do this at home, so they are free to do it at home. Then they come to the class giving us their experience or what they have done at home. So I think we cannot apply it like this. I think the word adaptation is the secret here. We must adapt and strike a balance between the real situation that we should expose our students to, and think we can adapt them here. But my question, this is what I get from your session today. The question here, who can do this? Teachers on their own, or the management, the institution? Because, you know, as you know, all the burden goes to on the teachers when they ask us to do anything. They ask the teacher directly. But I think here, adaptation or doing this, the institutions or the management should take their responsibilities here, and not all the burdens goes on the shoulders of the teachers. What's your opinion in this?
Every teacher should be supported by their institution. You shouldn't be doing anything that's against your school's rules, but at the same time, if you want to change what's happening in your school, then talking to the school management about if you'd be allowed to do some of these things might be a first step. I always think discussing these kinds of things and making sure that you're open and honest about what's happening in your classroom is the best policy. So yeah, I agree with you. The institutions need to be involved in it, but perhaps it's the teachers that need to stimulate that institutional change.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohammed. The next person on my list has an Arabic name, and I don't read Arabic, I'm afraid. So the person who's got their hand up with the Arabic name.
I'm going to help you, Boumadian Suhaila.
Oh, thank you very much.
Boumadian, go ahead. Suhaila Boumadian.
No, they're not unmuting. So I'll jump that and go to Mohammed Al-Sharkawi. Sorry, I'm making a mess of that. Mohammed Al-Sharkawi.
Mohammed Al-Sharkawi.
Thank you.
Hello, Alan. Super, Alan. This is a wonderful evening for me.
Thank you.
As I have attended this session, I benefited a lot. So thank you very much for that. And I think that project-based learning and the mixed ability classes can meet in a point. But I think we need to sort the students in order to help each other in achieving the project. So is it important to sort the students or according to their abilities or not? Thank you.
In a class where you're using project-based learning, I'd actually favor mixed ability groups. I think if you put all the low-level learners together and all the high-level learners together, that just creates a gap between them, and the gap grows bigger over time. The faster learners will always learn faster. The slower learners will always learn slower. If you mix them up, the faster learners can help slower learners, and they can go at around about the same speed. They'll be able to take on different tasks within the group that are suited to their levels, and they'll be able to help each other to succeed. So mixed ability groups, from my perspective.
Yes, thank you very much, Alan.
Okay, and Fatima.
Hello, sir. Thank you for this session. I would ask you some question about a student with a disability or special needs disability, how I could improve them language, and what's the perfect or perfect strategy, or there is some no?
Sorry, I'm shaking my head because I'm just thinking
Yes.
there's no one easy answer.
No,
There is no perfect strategy. First of all, it depends on their the problem that they're trying to overcome. It depends on their special need. So different special needs require different strategies.
yes.
And then it depends on what they're trying to learn, how they're trying to learn it, what kind of proficiency level they're at. So it's a big question. And I think it requires a lot more time and a lot more strategies than I could list.
Yes, I know that, but if you want to see to tell me if there's many materials or website to help them. Actually, I teach some students which have a special needs like autism or ADHD or else. So I
Well,
want to improve them English.
I will tell you that, for example, with ADHD, project-based learning role plays suit those kinds of learners very well. They hold their attention. If you've got a situation where you're changing partners and moving around the classroom, then kids with ADHD love that because it involves movement. They get a chance to talk to different people. Their brains are often moving a lot faster than other people, so they come up with ideas really quickly. So any kind of group work or pair work is a good idea to use with ADHD.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Fatima. There's one person left with their hand up, and I can't read the name. If you want to ask the question, please go ahead. But if not, we're at 7:30. And I think we can, Dr. Nermi from Egypt, Nermin, sorry, from Egypt. Do you have a question?
Hello, how are you?
Hi there.
I would like to ask you about some of the interactive activities and the online ones like Moodle and live worksheets. Do you think that they are overwhelming somehow in usage? Because sometimes I use some of them in my online classes, and I found that if I use a lot of them during the session, it becomes really overwhelming and really challenging for some of the students to go for like Quizlet and some of these websites, or sometimes I design activities online live worksheets, and I ask them to fill them out while they are working. I believe that I'm giving them more chance to practice the language and to be more interactive session, but some of the students, they're not following, and I believe that they are getting overwhelmed. I try to help, but I believe that it's not helpful. So could you recommend something or advise me how to use them appropriately?
It sounds like you need to use them less. One thing is that worksheets tend to limit the amount of language that the students can use. They might be talking about what the correct answers are, but they're not real world tasks. They're not actually doing anything with language authentically. So considering different ways to do tasks that you'd get them to use the language rather than just fill out a worksheet. So I suggested some of the different tasks from today's presentation might be helpful, but say putting the worksheet away and just having the students talk to each other, giving them a role play where they can create the kind of conversations that are on the worksheet. Use the worksheet to teach them the language, but then there needs to be another stage to that where they have some more freer practice using the language that they've learned.
So for using Kahoot and things like that, I should use them less and also give them more chance to work through other breakout rooms. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I think so. It sounds like you're using them a lot. I mean, only you can to make that decision about what you're going to edit from your lesson. But if you think it's overwhelming, then it probably is, and they need to do something different.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. And Fatima Al-Absi.
Yes, hello there, and thank you for the presentation. It was so useful. I'm an English teacher, an online English teacher, but I don't know either I am a teacher or an investigator, because you know, when you are teaching online, the students have the ability to cheat, especially in writing. They can use ChatGPT and submit their writing as if they are the one who wrote it, but they are not. And also in doing homework, for example, sometimes they copy it from their friends. So I have the pressure from the administration. They keep asking me, you have to investigate, you have to check, you have to. So sometimes I feel that I am a policewoman, not a teacher. So yeah, what I have to do, shall I depend on the student conscience, or shall I keep working on investigating as a policewoman? Thank you.
I would tell them that you know full well when a text has been made by ChatGPT. I mean, if you put the homework task into ChatGPT yourself, it will come up with the model answer. And when you see the model answer, if you see any other answers that look like that, you'll know that the student has used ChatGPT. It's also the ChatGPT answers will come up error-free most of the time, and you know that your students are likely to make grammar errors and spelling errors. And so if you get an error-free piece of work, you know that they haven't written it. I think they need to know that you're not stupid. They need to know that you know what ChatGPT is. So maybe talking about it openly and honestly at the beginning of a lesson, saying, I know you could put this into ChatGPT and get an answer, but that's not learning the language. So that doesn't help you to get better test scores when you do your end of term tests. It doesn't help you to develop your language abilities. So we can use ChatGPT as a useful tool for looking at model answers, but you need to write your own answers. And if you don't, then you get 0 marks.
Yeah. So it is a good idea to give them a 0, right?
Oh yeah, yes, definitely. I would give them a 0 and then say, if you submit again, I can give you a real grade, but you're not getting a grade for a ChatGPT answer. Be a policewoman, lay down the law, tell them what the consequences are.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to make this the last one. Sweet Lily.
Hello, Mr. Allen.
Hi there.
Hi, hello. Thank you so much, really, for being with us today. And I think it is a wonderful session too. Everyone was talking about how to improve, how to use strategies, so on. But the real question here, how can I, as a teacher, upgrade my skills? Now I think of myself as a tiny little fish in the sea. New strategy, really, I think that of myself now. How can I upgrade my skills? How can I be a better teacher? As you see around us, everything is new skills. Even the students themselves are upgrading in many different ways because of all the new stuff around them. ChatGPT, as an example, you see that even the students are trying to cheat. They're trying to be what can I say? I really forget all about it. They can they want to be more. How can I, as a teacher, be in a higher level? How can I upgrade my skills? Can you help me?
Well, taking part in these webinars is a really good start. The British Council's Teaching English website has a lot of resources on it. You can go and have a look at that and decide which of those resources would be most useful to you. There are a number of other British Council programs that you can take part in. So I think by taking this first step, you've started your journey already. We will have the resource list available next week for you. You can look at that and go through the different links that I'll be providing for that. You mentioned about students cheating. Students have always cheated. Students cheated when we were using paper and pen. They copied off each other. And when the internet came along, they started copying off the internet. So it's not a new thing. We just need to build strategies for dealing with it. And we
They
know
want
when
to
they're cheating.
outsmart us, you know?
Yeah, well,
all
they
the
can't.
time.
They can't.
Challenging. Okay. Can I ask you where are you from?
Pardon?
Can I ask you where are you from?
I'm originally from Aberdeen in Scotland, and
Yes.
I'm now based in Norwich.
The accent gave it away. Group. Okay. Thank you really so much for the session. Really. Thank you so much.
All right, Alan, are you still there?
Yes, yes, I am. Thank you very much, Alan. That was a great session. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Sorry, we had one or two technical problems, but the chat box has been full, not ChatGPT, the chat box has been full of really complimentary comments, some very interesting contributions from people who've done some real world projects in their teaching, and lots of big questions. So thanks once again. The next webinar in this series will be on the 18th of August, and that's Linda Ruas, who will be dealing with global issues and how to integrate global issues in the English language classroom. Apologies too if you had some problems joining the session. There was a technical issue with Zoom, and we seem to be limited to fewer people than we should have had, but we'll sort that out for next time. We look forward to seeing you again. Please encourage your colleagues to join us as well. So thanks again. Thank you, Alan. And goodbye for now. You'll be getting
and I'll see you all again in November.
You'll be getting a link via the WhatsApp group from the British Council, a link to the recording of this session, and within about a week there'll also be a list of resources related to the content of this session available for you. So thanks again, and good night from both the Allens.